Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
Snow fell in a hushed ballet over the rooftops of our tranquil neighborhood, each flake seeming to pause in the winter air as if time itself had decelerated just for this one day. It was Christmas morning. From where I stood, cradling a fresh cup of coffee in my hands, our house looked like something lifted from a vintage greeting card, the kind with silver glitter that gets everywhere and smells faintly of memories and pine. The aroma of dark roast coffee mingled with the sharp, clean scent of the balsam fir we decorated, its branches heavy with ornaments that trace the story of our lives. Underneath it all was the boisterous laughter of my grandchildren, running barefoot on the plush carpet. Their costumes were a chaotic mix of fantasy and laundry basket fine. Little Leo, my youngest grandson, wore a cape fashioned from a blue bedsheet, his voice high and earnest as he declared his intent to save the world with the power of hot chocolate. His older sister, Iris, had a crooked tiara perched on her head and insisted, with all the gravity a 7-year-old could muster, on being addressed only as Her Royal Highness, the Pajama Queen. Oh! From the kitchen came the comforting clatter of pots and pans, the warm breath of cakes emerging from the oven, and the sound of my daughter Clara's voice, a gentle plea to her husband not to burn the toast again. It was the kind of organized chaos that only exists when a family is truly together, a beautiful, sprawling mess where everything somehow makes perfect sense. For a few seconds, I stood apart from it all, an observer in my own life, just absorbing the scene. This was it. This was the life Arthur and I had built. My children, now grown with their own quirks and lives. Their spouses, who had become my own. And their children, these bright, noisy reflections of a journey that had spanned so many years. Clara, my youngest, sat with one hand resting protectively on the soft swell of her belly, her cheeks rosy with the glow of her third trimester. From time to time, her eyes would find mine across the room, a silent, searching glance that I knew was a plea for support, for reassurance in the face of the enormous new phase she was entering. The connection between us was a palpable thing. I remembered the exact moment I learned I was to become a grandmother for the first time. The shock, the joy, and the memory of Arthur, my strong, steady Arthur, crying more than anyone else in the room. It felt so recent and yet so impossibly distant, all at once. And there was Arthur. He was doing what he did best, touching people's hearts without a shred of effort. He was seated at the old upright piano in the corner, his fingers moving over the keys with familiar grace, playing a quiet, instrumental version of Silent Night. The melody was a gentle undercurrent to the laughter and the clinking of silverware being arranged on the dining table. It was subtle, but it was the anchor of the morning. His eyes, the same kind blue they'd been when I first met him, took in everything with a profound affection, as if he knew, as he always seemed to, that life doesn't have to be grand to be special. The real luxury, Eleanor, he always said, is having the people who love you nearby, and still wanting to spend time with you. I took a deep breath, the warmth of the moment seeping into my bones. The fireplace crackled, its heat warming not just the room, but the quiet, shadowed corners of my memory. I thought of how many Christmases we'd spent like this, how many plates of cookies had been left by the tree for a Santa Claus that Arthur would later sneak downstairs to eat, just to keep the magic alive for the children. I looked down at my hands, clasped around my mug. They were more wrinkled now, etched with the roadmap of my life, but they were still steady. I remembered how they once held my children's tiny hands to cross the street, how they trembled as I fixed my hair before an important interview, how they had rested on Arthur's shoulder through sickness and celebration. It was a perfect moment, almost sacred in its simple perfection. And that was when he approached me. Arthur walked slowly, a slight, gentle smile on his lips, but there was an expression in his eyes that was different. Hard to define at first, it held a weight that seemed out of place amidst the morning's cheer. He held out a small, rectangular package, carefully wrapped in gold paper with a deep, dark red bow. "Open this by yourself," he said, his voice calm and low, "meant only for me." I furrowed my brow, not in suspicion, but in genuine surprise. It was a rare request. Christmas for us had always been a shared celebration, an open book with no secrets and no private moments. I took the gift from him, its weight surprisingly slight in my hands. It felt fragile, as if it contained something that could easily be broken. I managed a small, forced smile and nodded. As I turned and walked toward the stairs, the vibrant noise of my family began to fade behind me, muffled by the thick carpet on the steps. The upstairs felt colder, quieter. Each step I took echoed on the old wood, and that little package, which had seemed so light just a moment before, now felt heavier than I could possibly explain. I went into the office. It was a space we hadn't used much in recent years, a quiet sanctuary of forgotten things. Books sat on dusty shelves, their spines uncracked. The curtains were half open, letting in the gentle, white light of the winter morning, a light that seemed to absorb all sound. I sat down in the dark leather chair, the one Arthur used to spend hours in, painstakingly writing birthday cards by hand for each child and grandchild. He was methodical, a man of detail. Every word he wrote was carefully chosen, weighed for its truth and its kindness. Holding the present in my hands, I hesitated. My gaze drifted around the room as if seeking an answer in the silent walls, in the old paintings, in the framed photograph of Arthur and me in our youth, smiling with our feet in the sand on some long-ago beach trip. We were so young then, so unaware of the complexities that life would one day weave around us. Finally, I pulled at the silk ribbon. It came undone with a soft whisper. I slowly began to unwrap the gold paper, my fingers feeling clumsy and slow. Inside was a black velvet box. My heart gave a little thump against my ribs. I lifted the lid. Resting on the velvet was a necklace, a thin, elegant gold chain. It was simple, beautiful, and utterly timeless. As I lifted it completely, I noticed something engraved on the small, round pendant. The letters were tiny, almost impossible to see, yet somehow they felt familiar even before I could read them. I held the necklace closer to the window, angling it to catch the light. My eyes strained, and then the inscription swam into focus. The greatest gift of all. I set the necklace down, my mind puzzling over the words. It was a lovely sentiment, but Arthur's quiet intensity suggested there was more to it. And there was. Beneath the velvet padding where the necklace had lain was a letter. A crisp, white envelope with my name, Eleanor, written in Arthur's firm, elegant hand. A chill, sudden and sharp, went down my spine. Something about this gesture, the private gift, the separation from the family, the formality of the letter told me there was more here than a simple token of affection. My heart started beating faster, a frantic, unsteady rhythm, as though it already knew that the words inside that envelope could shatter the magic of this perfect Christmas morning. I stared at the envelope. It held only my name. Nothing else. Just Eleanor, written without a single correction, each letter a gesture of honor. I knew that writing so well. Arthur always wrote as if each word was an act of profound respect. He was the kind of man who thought before he spoke, who calculated before he acted, but who felt everything with a depth that sometimes frightened me. The moment my fingers touched the paper, the world outside seemed to go completely silent. I could no longer hear the children's laughter, the crackling fireplace, or the cheerful birds on the porch. The bubble of quiet that now surrounded the office was absolute and unnerving. With slightly trembling hands, I broke the seal and opened the envelope. The paper smelled of fresh ink. He must have written it recently, maybe earlier this same morning, just hours before the joyful chaos began. I unfolded the single sheet of heavy cream-colored stationery and began to read. The first sentence was a loving greeting, the kind of opening you'd find in an ordinary holiday card. "My dearest Eleanor," it began. But as my eyes moved down each line, the temperature of the room seemed to drop. The sweetness of the opening words gave way to something heavier, something weighted with a sorrow I hadn't seen in him for years. Arthur wrote with his heart laid bare, but it wasn't a heart wounded in any trivial sense. This was a hurt that came from somewhere deep within, the pain of a man who had been struck in the very core of what he believed to be untouchable. He wrote about time, about how the years had passed in a single breath. He wrote about the day I walked into his life, how he remembered in perfect detail the way I smiled when I asked for a cup of tea in that little coffee shop where everything began. He recalled the blue cotton dress I wore that day, the way I had a nervous habit of tucking a stray strand of hair behind my ear. Every memory was described with such loving precision that I found it hard to breathe. But then came the break. The story shifted, subtly at first, then with devastating clarity. He wrote that he had felt something strange in recent months. A soft but cruel distancing, small silences that stretched into chasms between us, averted gazes when our eyes used to meet and hold, laughs that we used to share that had begun to appear elsewhere, reserved for a screen I held in my hands. A heaviness settled in my stomach, cold and hard like a stone. The next words hit me with surgical precision. "I found out there's someone else. Not physically, not yet. But in your heart, he's already occupying a space that used to be mine." I stopped reading. My eyes were stuck on the letters, as if by staring at them long enough, I could erase what they had just communicated. My mind raced, denial warring with a sickening wave of guilt. Robert knew. He knew about Julian. The letter went on with an unsettling calm. There was no anger, no rage, no accusations hurled from the page. Instead, he wrote that he had felt grief, a profound, hollow grief, as if he'd lost someone, as if his wife had passed away even though she was sleeping by his side every night. He described nights when he would turn over in bed and find only emptiness. Not a physical emptiness I was always there, but an emotional one. The lack of spontaneous affection, of the quiet conversations we used to have before sleep, of the casual, thoughtless touch of a hand on an arm. With each paragraph, I felt as though I were being ripped out of my own story, forced to look at it all from the outside, through his wounded eyes. Robert talked about how he discovered the messages. He said he hadn't read them by snooping, it wasn't his nature, but by accident. My phone had lit up on the nightstand with a notification, and the preview on the screen was enough. And even though he swore he saw no explicit words or direct confessions, there were glaring hints in the subtext. He recognized the name, Julian, from a thank you card I'd received for some project. He saw it in the new spark in my eyes when I mentioned my work, in the way I guarded my phone, in 100 subtle things that, when pieced together, formed a truth that was impossible to ignore. Then, he wrote about the necklace, the one lying on the table beside me, a simple piece of jewelry that now carried a symbolic weight I could have never imagined. The greatest gift of all, he wrote, isn't referring to this necklace, it is referring to a choice, to forgiveness, to a chance. He wasn't begging. He wasn't confronting me with hate. On the contrary, he was offering something impossibly rare, a door left slightly ajar, a chance to rebuild. But he made it clear, with a quiet firmness that was unmistakably his, that he couldn't move forward if I didn't shut that chapter with Julian, completely and irrevocably. The final words of the letter were etched into my soul. The greatest gift I can give you today is my vulnerability. And maybe, if you want it, the hope that we can rebuild what's collapsing. The choice, Eleanor, is yours. When I finished reading, I couldn't move. The letter was still in my hands, but it felt as heavy as lead. My eyes burned, but no tears came. My throat was dry. I pictured Arthur downstairs, smiling at our grandchildren, his fingers gliding over the piano keys, and that image, once a source of comfort, now hit me with the force of a physical blow. He knew all of it. He knew, and still, he chose to be whole for them, for our family, this Christmas. He still made the coffee. He still played the piano. He still gave me a gift. I picked up the necklace again, turning the cool metal in my fingers, and looked at the inscription. Only then did I understand the terrifying, beautiful magnitude of those words. The gift wasn't the gold. The gift was Arthur himself, offering all that he was, all his pain and all his love, despite everything. It was a mature kind of love, a love that had been wounded but was still standing. At that moment, something inside me crumbled. It wasn't just guilt, though that was certainly there, sharp and suffocating. It was awareness, a bitter, blinding realization of what I had nearly destroyed in silence, day by day, hiding behind harmless messages, exchanged compliments, and emotional needs fed by vanity. Everything in that dusty office looked the same, but I was different. I had been irrevocably changed by the words on that page. Arthur's letter echoed in my mind, each word engraved on my heart. I was still holding the paper, but my gaze was locked on some random spot on the carpet, as if searching for answers in the woven threads. A throbbing ache rose in my throat, but above all, I felt something I could barely name. Shame. A deep, profound shame, accompanied by a crushing weight, as if I'd suddenly been forced to face everything I had preferred to sweep under the rug: my vanity, my emotional escape, my desperate need for validation hidden behind makeup and digital compliments from a man who knew nothing of the life I had built. Now, it was all laid bare in front of me. No filters, no excuses. The necklace lay on the table, looking far too delicate to carry so much meaning. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, and images began flashing through my mind like an old movie reel spinning in reverse. But this time, it wasn't Julian's charming face I saw or the recent, fleeting thrill that had made me feel alive for a few deceptive moments. What surfaced were memories of Arthur. Simple, quiet moments, but moments full of a truth I had taken for granted. I saw myself, 20 years younger, soaked by a sudden downpour in a grocery store parking lot, trying frantically to shield Clara's birthday cake with a flimsy plastic bag. Arthur appeared out of nowhere with an umbrella, and without saying a word, he just held it over me and the cake. He didn't mind getting drenched himself. He took the cake from my trembling hands and smiled as if it were the most natural thing in the world. For years after, he'd joked that the rain was worth every drop just to see the look on my face. Another memory flooded in. The night my father was rushed to the hospital. I was crying in the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway, holding my phone like a ticking bomb. Arthur arrived, nearly out of breath, after driving 3 hours straight from a business meeting in the countryside. He didn't offer platitudes. He just sat beside me, placed his large, warm hands over mine, and stayed there in silence, a pillar of flesh and blood holding my entire world together. More scenes followed, as if my heart was desperately trying to shout that there was still something there, something worth saving. I remembered the day Arthur sold his classic motorcycle, a cherished gift from his late father, to help pay for the fertility treatments that would give Clara a better chance at getting pregnant. He didn't hesitate. He just said, "Family is what drives me, the rest is just metal." Then I recalled a nearly forgotten moment, so small I had almost lost it to time. A little paper note left in my medication box years ago when I was going through a bout of debilitating migraines and felt useless, heavy, and invisible. In his familiar, steady script, he had written, "Even on the days you can't smile, you're still the most amazing woman I've ever met." My eyes filled with tears. They weren't hurried or dramatic tears. They were thick and slow, loaded with the weight of years of love I had stopped appreciating the way I once did. I finally understood. Julian's appearance in my life hadn't been prompted by true love, but by my own emptiness, by the illusion that I needed something new and exciting from the outside, when everything I ever needed was right here, within the walls of this home. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. The snow was still falling, but each flake looked sharper now, more defined. The trees, blanketed in white, created a scene worthy of a movie. Yet I saw beyond the landscape. I saw the faces that mattered. My grandchildren, Clara, my other children, their spouses, and Arthur. He was downstairs, present and whole, despite everything. He knew, and he was still there. I grabbed my phone from where it was charging on a bookshelf. My fingers paused for a fraction of a second over the screen. I opened my conversation with Julian. There they were, a series of messages, some playful, some flattering, secrets shared at times when Arthur was already asleep beside me. It was so easy to fool myself in that digital space. It had seemed so harmless. But now, with eyes free from illusion, it all felt like a profound betrayal of the spirit. I wrote with a clarity I hadn't felt in months, with no beating around the bush, like someone finally waking from a long, restless sleep. It's over, Julian. Please don't contact me again. What happened between us was a mistake. I was lost, and I used you as an excuse to run from what I needed to face in myself. But now I know what really matters. I have someone who loves me even with all my flaws. And I choose him. I choose my family. I choose to be whole again where I should have stayed all along. I took a deep breath before pressing send. And when I did, it felt like I'd finally opened the windows of a room that had been locked and shuttered for far too long. A room holding all the versions of myself that had forgotten to treasure what was essential. I went downstairs quietly. With each step, my heart pounded faster, not with fear, but with a strange, resolute purpose. The warm, lively sound of the living room returned, the kids playing, Clara chatting with her sister-in-law, the muted piano melody now playing something new, something more hopeful. Arthur was still there, sitting on the piano bench, wearing the same calm expression, but now I could see the faint lines of strain around his eyes, the deep well of pain he was holding back. I watched him from the doorway, and something inside me broke irreversibly. But this time, it was a necessary break, the shattering of a facade I had been maintaining for too long. I walked across the carpet, almost unnoticed in the festive swirl, and stopped beside him. I extended my hand. He looked up, surprised, his fingers hesitating over the keys. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just let his fingers interlace with mine, his skin warm and familiar against my own. And there, in that silent, simple gesture, the world seemed to stop for a brief, breathless moment. I knew no words I could say at that instant would be enough, but I also knew the gesture, the choice, the return, those might be the beginning of something real. He squeezed my hand gently, a silent acknowledgement, and a single tear I hadn't realized I was holding finally escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. That night, when everyone was asleep, and the house finally breathed in silence, I woke earlier than I would have liked. The clock on the bedside table showed a little past 3:00 the morning. One of the grandkids had left the guest room door slightly ajar, and a thin sliver of hallway light spilled into our room. The necklace was still on my bedside table, a living reminder of all that had been said, written, and felt. I looked at it, my eyes heavy with exhaustion, but my heart too awake to allow any true rest. It was as if the weight of my choice to stay, to own my mistakes, to try to rebuild what had been so badly shaken demanded an immediate, practical response. I slipped on my slippers and walked out of the bedroom without making a sound. I headed down the hall to the guest room where Arthur had been sleeping. We had decided to sleep separately some time ago, something that had happened gradually, almost imperceptibly, like little cracks forming in old walls that you only notice when it's too late. His loud snoring, we had told ourselves, was the reason. But now I knew it was a symptom of a deeper drift. I stopped by his door and hesitated. I had rehearsed what I would say many times in my head, but in that moment, no phrase felt like enough. No words could capture the storm raging inside me. Instead, I decided to go to the backyard. It was cold, but I needed the chilly air on my face, something sharp and real to cut through the fog of my shame. I put on a coat, grabbed a blanket from the living room sofa, and passed through the glass door that led outside. Snowflakes were still falling in slow motion, as if time had stretched out this Christmas for a few more hours. I sat on a wooden bench near the lit-up pine tree we had decorated on the lawn. The colored lights blinked at a gentle, hypnotic pace, as though the world had decided to grant me a moment of peace to reflect. Through the window, I noticed a light flick on in the kitchen. It was Arthur. His slow steps suggested he was probably just getting some water. But when he saw the backyard light on, he changed course. A moment later, the glass door slid open. He found me sitting there, wrapped in the blanket, my eyes misty, staring up at the dark sky. I didn't turn right away, but when I sensed his presence beside me, I spoke softly, almost in a whisper. I'm still here because I love you. My voice was thick with unshed tears, and it's not that youthful, impatient, impulsive love, it's a love that understands it can fail, but it can also learn to start again. Arthur didn't reply. He moved closer and sat beside me on the cold bench. For a while, we just listened to the whisper of the wind rustling the snow-laden trees and the distant, mournful call of an owl. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary, a pause between everything that had been said and everything that was yet to come. Finally, I slowly turned to face him. My eyes, I knew, must look different. There was a vulnerability in them that only those who truly repent can bear. I held his hand firmly, my fingers cold against his. I got lost, I went on, the words tumbling out now. I got lost trying to prove something to myself, something I can't even name now. But today, after reading your letter and holding that necklace, I understand. The greatest gift I received was realizing that real love isn't always pretty. It bleeds, it gets tired, it nearly gives up, but it still stays. Arthur took a deep breath, like a man mustering the courage to feel again after being numb for too long. After a few seconds, he nodded and gazed up at the sky. The full moon, hidden behind a thin veil of clouds, lit the yard with a soft, almost bluish light. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I gave you that necklace because I wanted to give you a choice, Eleanor. And even without knowing what you'd decide, I chose to keep loving you, with no guarantees. I rested my head on his shoulder, a familiar gesture that now felt brand new. We stayed like that for a long time, two old souls who, after losing their way in the wilderness of their own making, had finally found their path back to each other. It was a reconciliation without empty promises, without over-the-top declarations, just a silent, shared decision to keep walking side by side, one careful step at a time. The following weeks were a landscape of quiet negotiation. Dorothy had to look deeper inside herself than she ever had before, excavating the roots of her discontent, the vanity and insecurity that had led her to seek validation elsewhere. Our conversations, at first, were marked by long, heavy pauses, by avoided glances, and the inevitable discomfort of two people relearning how to navigate a space that had once been second nature. Arthur didn't pretend to forget. The hurt was still there, visible in the slight tension in his jaw, or the moments his gaze would go distant. But he also didn't use his pain as a weapon. He listened to me, sometimes with a profound sadness in his eyes, sometimes with a contained anger that was more frightening than any outburst would have been, but always, always with honesty. He was creating a space for my truth, no matter how ugly it was. I wrote letters to him, many of them. I found it easier to articulate the depths of my remorse on paper, to untangle the knots of my own foolishness without the pressure of his immediate reaction. In one, I left a note on his pillow in the guest room, saying simply, "Thank you for staying, even when I didn't deserve it." The next morning, I found his answer. He had stuck an old photo of the two of them on the fridge, a picture from a vacation years ago, where we were both laughing, sun-kissed, and carefree. On top, he had stuck a small note, "We're still those people in this picture. Just a little more bruised, and maybe stronger because of it." Slowly, carefully, over time, the house began to regain its natural warmth. The invisible walls between us began to crumble, brick by painful brick. We started sleeping in the same room again. The first few nights were stiff and awkward, a chasm of unspoken words in the mattress between us. But one night, I woke from a bad dream, and without thinking, I reached for him. He was already awake. He simply took my hand and held it until the sun came up. Then, Clara had her baby. She named her Hope. The gesture struck me with a force that took my breath away. I knew, without her ever saying it, how much that word now represented everything we were going through as a family. The arrival of little Hope brought a new light into our lives, a focal point of pure, uncomplicated joy. Holding my new granddaughter, feeling her tiny weight in my arms, I felt a powerful sense of renewal. She was a new beginning, a reason to fight harder, to be better. Her presence brought the family even closer and provided new, undeniable reasons to smile, to look forward, to believe in the future we were so tentatively trying to rebuild. But there was still one last, unexpected chapter to our trial, a final test I never saw coming. Out of nowhere, a few weeks after Hope was born, I got a call from a mutual acquaintance, a friend of Julian's. The voice on the other end of the line sounded anxious and troubled. She warned me, her words tumbling out in a rush, that Julian had shared parts of my messages on his social media, edited images of our chats, some taken wildly out of context, others the more flirtatious, foolish ones that never should have been made public in the first place. It was a desperate, cruel attempt at exposure, a petty revenge disguised as some kind of twisted righteousness. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. I ran to the computer, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs, and opened my social media page. There it was. A post with screenshots, accompanied by captions that dripped with condescending pity, implying I was just another bored, lonely wife looking for a thrill. Comments were already piling up beneath it. Strangers, people who knew nothing of my life, of my marriage, of Arthur, were weighing in, judging, laughing, dissecting my failure for their own amusement. The shame I had felt in the office on Christmas morning returned, but this time it was magnified 1,000 times, naked and exposed for the entire world to see. I felt sick. I wanted to disappear, but then, something extraordinary happened. A few minutes after the post went viral in our small community, just as I was about to delete my account and retreat into a shell of humiliation, Arthur went on my profile and posted an open letter. It wasn't a blind defense. It wasn't an angry tirade against Julian. It was a testament to his character, to our shared life, a response crafted with elegance, clarity, and a staggering amount of grace. He recounted, in broad but honest strokes, what had happened between us. He wrote about pain, about the difficult reality of a long marriage, about making mistakes, and about the conscious choice of forgiveness. He explained that we weren't brushing off my mistake, but were actively working to rebuild from it. Together, he wrote that the outside judgment of strangers could never begin to understand the complex, intimate history that binds two people together over a lifetime. A marriage is not a fairy tale, he wrote. It is a long, often difficult, and beautiful story co-authored by two imperfect people. This was a painful chapter in our story, but it will not be the last. Real love is not about never failing. It is about how you rise together after you fall. And my wife and I are rising. The post touched thousands of people. It was shared widely, far beyond our circle of friends. Couples came forward in the comments with their own stories of struggle and forgiveness. People left messages saying they felt inspired, not by my failure, but by his response, inspired to forgive, to try again, to look at their own partners with more compassion. In the face of his profound dignity, Julian's petty revenge looked exactly like what it was, small and pathetic. Within a day, he had deleted his posts and disappeared from social media. That night, I finally realized that real love, true love, doesn't need to hide. It can withstand exposure, shame, and public scrutiny. And above all, it teaches you about yourself, about your partner, and about the incredible resilience of the human heart. I lay down in bed next to Arthur, the quiet comfort of his presence a balm on my raw nerves. I took his hand, the lines and calluses so familiar, so dear to me. The greatest gift of all, I whispered into the darkness, the words finally feeling like my own, was learning how to truly love, and how to be loved, even when I was lost to myself. You won. In the darkness of the room, with the soft, muffled sound of snow still falling outside our window, Arthur gave my hand a gentle squeeze. It was the only answer I really needed.